Hi, can you all hear me okay? Okay. If you can't, you'll have to come sit in the front row. So my name is Julie Larry, and I was previously the Director of Advocacy at Greater Portland Landmarks. I was in that role for about 6 years. And during that time, every summer, we would have interns come in and we would do survey work documenting properties in neighborhoods around Portland. And one of the neighborhoods that we worked in was quite near to the University of Southern Maine campus. And it happened to include a neighborhood that was developed in the 1920s using both kit and catalog houses. This particular developer developed several neighborhoods in Portland using these, and so you'll see some of those houses a little bit later in the presentation, as well as some in some of the surrounding communities that we researched. So the first part of the presentation that I'll talk a little bit about is kind of the history of kit and catalog homes, and then I'll talk about some of the different manufacturers, the different styles of homes, and then about the last third of the slides are some of the local homes in the Greater Portland area that we have documented. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Much better weather than the last time I was here, which was pouring rain. So I appreciate sunshine and getting to see Cumberland in a much better light. The American dream of home ownership was fostered by reformers and developers and building material companies in the very early 20th century. Home ownership leading up to the turn of the 20th century was not particularly common. Home ownership, particularly in urban areas, was mostly renters. Large Victorian homes usually necessitated some help for the housewife to maintain the house, and that could be a very prohibitive cost for many families. Victorian homes also featured very individualized formal rooms, and in the kit home and catalog buildings from the early 20th century, those homes were generally smaller and featured a more open floor plan that could accommodate a less formal lifestyle and a less costly style of living for families. The prefabrication of house materials reduced construction labor costs and lowered material costs through bulk purchasing at centralized facilities. The kit home industry introduced financing programs that offered mortgages to individuals that wouldn't otherwise have had access to bank financing. In particular, a number of companies, including Sears and Roebuck, were extremely generous in making mortgages to underprivileged, very low income and African-American families that under other circumstances wouldn't have had access to capital at a bank. These lower costs and payment options allowed middle class and working class families throughout the country to be able to afford to live in a single family home, particularly younger families who might have previously lived in multi-generational housing situations due to their financial limitations. The opportunities, coupled with the expansion of railroad networks for distribution of kit homes, occurred during a very progressive era of social reform that focused on improving household efficiency, living conditions, and housing sanitation, particularly for city dwellers and those very rural residents of the country. This confluence of events helped to drive the popularity of kit home industry in the first quarter of the 20th century. So now I'll start to talk a little bit about the history and what a kit home is. Some of the major kit home manufacturers in this country in the early 20th century came out of the lumber business, and that was their impetus for getting into the manufacture of kit homes. And what is a kit house? A kit house is a package of nearly all materials: lumber, millwork, flooring, siding, roofing, gutters, piping, windows, hardware, lath, and paints that you might need to build a house, including an instructional booklet. And can you imagine what an instructional booklet must have looked like to build a house? I think putting together furniture is bad enough when you have to do that. So those materials would be shipped to you, as Carolyn mentioned, from the mail order company by train to your town. Usually in a couple of phases, you would get your rough lumber and then your finished materials might come on a separate train. Home builders would then pick up the materials at the local train station and assemble the home on their site. There were 7 major kit manufacturing companies in the United States and a few smaller regional companies. And although records do not exist for all of those companies, it is estimated that between 1/2 to 750,000 kit homes were sold by the major manufacturers in the first half of the 20th century. The kit homes that we've been researching while I was at Greater Portland Landmarks were generally built between 1908 to 1940, but kit homes were manufactured as late as the 1970s. Kit homes manufacturing grew out of a period of great demand in the United States for housing. The U.S. population grew by 50% in 20 years between 1890 and 1910. The height of kit home manufacturing production corresponds to the same period as a rise in automobile ownership as well, and many of these kit home manufacturers also made garages. Kit homes are most commonly located in these early automobile suburbs or company towns throughout the country. And while the homes were marketed to individual homeowners, kit homes were very attractive for contractors and real estate developers, much like the neighborhood that we initially surveyed in Portland, because they could erect these houses on speculation at a very low cost and very quickly and have them on the market very quickly. And they were also very attractive to large companies that required affordable housing for their workers. So a number of company towns use kit homes. A majority of the kit home manufacturers were located in the Midwest and delivered their products regionally, so that the vast majority of extant kit homes are located in either Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, or Indiana. However, manufacturers expanded their mill holdings, shortening delivery times, and kit homes were sold and delivered throughout the country as well as overseas. So this is the Aladdin Company's distribution network. You can see that they were primarily out of Bay City, Michigan, but they ended up operating mills on the west and down south. This is another manufacturer, Gordon Van Tyne. They, Davenport, Iowa, but they also had mills in the northwest and in the southeast. Kit home manufacturing and sales in the earliest 20th century grew out of a long history of sales and distribution of home plan and low-volume prefabricated housing materials. For many years in the 18th and 19th century, there were books of plans used by owners and builders to design and construct houses in the popular styles of the period. Asher Benjamin was a Connecticut-born author and architect, well known for influencing classical residential design with his pattern books in the early and mid-19th century. One of his books is The Country Builder's Assistant from 1798, which you can see on the left in the slide. Also, there was New Yorker Andrew Jackson Downing, who was a writer and landscape designer who promoted the Gothic Revival style of architecture for small, affordable cottages in the model homes he illustrated in his publications, Cottage Residences, published in 1842, and The Architecture of Country Houses, published in 1850. And you can see a sketch and a plan from his 1842 publication on the right-hand side of the slide. One of the earliest examples of a prefabricated house is the wood house, or the frame house. This is the oldest wood-framed house in Honolulu, Hawaii. It was erected in 1821 with materials that were shipped from Boston by boat to be used as a communal home and lodging house for missionaries. A few decades later, the 1849 gold rush created a very short-lived need for prefabricated housing. As there was yet no lumber industry in Northern California, or in much of the West, actually, housing materials were shipped from the East Coast, as well as from Europe and countries along the Pacific Rim, to San Francisco to fulfill the region's building shortage. The William Heath Davis House in San Diego, California, which you can see in the image on the right, is one of these prefabricated houses. It was actually shipped from Portland, Maine, initially to San Francisco, arrived a little bit late in the gold rush era and wasn't needed, so it was shipped down then to San Diego, where it was assembled in 1850. In the years leading up to the Civil War, lumbermen D.N. Skillings and D.B. Flint formed the Skillings and Flint Company of Boston, and they began marketing prefabricated, panelized structures, primarily towards plantation owners and the Army. Their catalog designs also included some types of buildings that they marketed towards the railroad companies that were expanding to the west. Like Skillings and Flint, many of the 20th century kit home manufacturers I'll talk about today grew out, as I said, of an interest in the lumber industry. So Skillings and Flint did, as you can see in these examples here, they did hospital wards, barracks, I'm not going to think of the name, but the mess, the chow hall. They would do all of these types of buildings for the Army, and they also did housing for plantation owners, primarily in the Caribbean. So this is 1850s, 1860s. But probably the best known kit home manufacturer, when you think of kit homes, is Sears. Sears, Roebuck and Company. Richard Sears was the founder of the company, and he had been a lumber and coal dealer in Minnesota before founding the jewelry company that would then grow to become Sears and Roebuck in Chicago. The mail order company sold hardware, millwork, roofing materials, paints and stains, along with household and clothing items. I'm sure many of us remember the Sears catalog and when it would come at Christmas time and how exciting that would be. However, Sears' building materials department did very lackluster sales, and it nearly was closed in 1906. But they began to flourish when the company turned to packaging their building materials into home packages. And with their new success, the company acquired mills in Mansfield, Louisiana, and Cairo, Illinois, as well as a millwork plant in Norrid, Ohio. So from 1908 to 1940, Sears, Roebuck and Company sold about 70 to 75,000 homes through their mail order Modern Homes program. In 1920, their Cairo plant alone could produce 250 houses a month. However, Sears was not a particularly innovative home designer, and they often borrowed other people's designs, particularly from popular building catalogs of the day, building plan catalogs. And they capitalized really on their ability to offer the buyer an opportunity to modify houses and the hardware according to their tastes. So for instance, if you wanted to put in a chimney or a fireplace in your living room, that was something you could add to your design. It might not necessarily be in the base plan, and they could modify designs to fit your needs. Individuals could design their own homes and submit the plans to Sears, who would then create a pattern to cut out all the materials needed for that design, and they would ship those off just as they did their standard housing plans in the same manner. Modern home customers also had the freedom to build their dream houses, and Sears helped to realize those dreams through quality custom design and very favorable financing. Sears in particular was known to be a very open and they would lend to anybody, I guess is sort of the point. And one of the largest amounts of research that's been done in recent years on identifying kit houses, because not all of the Sears records exist, is they were able to identify the gentleman who worked for Sears Mortgage Company, and then they can go through deed records and find the names of those men within the deed records and determine who was building Sears catalog houses because of the mortgage records. And that was indeed how we found a number of kit homes in the state of Maine using that same deed research. So here's just a couple of covers from different catalogs published by Sears and Roebuck. This is Carlinville, Illinois. It has the largest contiguous collection of Sears homes with 152 homes in a 12-block radius. The homes were purchased in 1918 by Standard Oil for worker housing at their Carlinville mine. They also purchased an additional 36 houses for company housing in other communities that they had near mines in southern Illinois. One of the lesser-known manufacturers is Gordon Van Tyne Company. They were established in 1907 as a building materials distributor in Davenport, Iowa. It was an outgrowth of U.N. Roberts, which was a lumber mill and mail-order building supply company founded in 1866. Its location in Davenport, Iowa, was strategically situated on the Mississippi River and next to a major rail line, great for distribution. Lumber was supplied to the company's mill via the river, and then the freight was distributed by rail to the east and west coasts of the United States. Gordon Van Tyne is believed to have been established by Roberts to furnish Sears and Roebuck Company with their millwork materials before they acquired mills of their own. Sears contracted with Gordon Van Tyne for 5 years until they purchased their Norwood, Ohio millwork plant in 1912. A few years later, in 1916, Gordon Van Tyne began to offer their own line of kit homes known as ready-cut houses. And then a few years later, in 1919, they contracted with Montgomery Ward to manufacture that company's new line of kit homes. Montgomery Ward was also, like Sears, in Chicago, and they offered household goods and clothing, just as Sears did, delivered by mail. They had begun selling building materials, lumber, hardware, and houseplans before World War I. However, they didn't have the manufacturing infrastructure to design and cut and package an entire house. So as I mentioned, in 1919, they contracted their kit house manufacturing to Gordon Van Tyne and began selling the homes under the Wardway Homes name. As a result, many of the homes sold by Montgomery Ward are identical to homes sold by Gordon Van Tyne, which makes identifying them a little bit more challenging. The Wardway ready-cut kits were sold until 1931. The Great Depression really took a toll on company sales. However, much of the profit in the kit home manufacturing business was not through sales, but through the mortgages. And it was part of the New Deal were mortgage programs through the Federal Housing Administration, which allowed homeowners to refinance their existing home mortgages at a much lower rate, which essentially undercut the mortgage programs that Sears and Montgomery Ward were offering and really cut the profits in those businesses for both of those companies. So although other manufacturers were able to survive the Great Depression, Montgomery Ward terminated their kit home business as a result. The Harris brothers were also a Chicago kit home manufacturer. They were originally called the Chicago House Wrecking Company, so they were not involved in the lumber business. That was not an outgrowth for them, but they were involved in the demolition of buildings. And the Chicago House Wrecking Company is probably most well known for doing some of the demolition at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. They were the company that actually destroyed the fair's iconic Ferris wheel from 1893. Harris Brothers' first kit home catalog was published in 1910, and like other companies, they offered a service to produce special plans to order, which meant that they would take the customer sketches and create plans to their specifications. So you could have a custom house or you could buy one of their package deals. Most of the homes designed and manufactured by Harris are found in Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan, although we can tell from their catalogs, they would include little testimonials in their catalogs. And so we know that they sold houses here in Maine because there are some testimonials from Maine homeowners in some of their early catalogs. In addition to their kit homes, Harris also sold sectional housings. That was like panels that you would just assemble together. And those were called presto up houses. And those were even more rapid assembly than the kit homes. The next manufacturer is one of the longest-lived and most successful kit home companies. It's Aladdin Homes. They were located in Bay City, Michigan. They were founded by brothers William and Otto Sovereign in 1906, and the company remained solvent and family-owned until it shut its doors for the last time in 1981. Over its 70-plus years in business, Aladdin sold more than 75,000 homes. Customers included individuals, single families, and corporate clients in both domestic and international markets. Whole neighborhoods and even a town, the town of Hopewell, Virginia, were developed using Aladdin Homes. The company's customer list included the state of Michigan, the president of Liberia, Dow Chemical Company, Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, and Standard Oil. Also located in Bay City, Michigan, was the Lewis Manufacturing Company. The Lewis family had an interest in lumber companies, and so this was an outgrowth of their lumber planing mill and their real estate business. They manufactured doors, window sashes, and wood flooring, and had very close ties with Aladdin, which, as I mentioned, was also in Bay City, Michigan. And for years, they actually manufactured Aladdin's kit homes. So from 1907 to 1914, they were actually producing the kit homes for neighboring Aladdin homes. They were located in a facility on the shores of Lake Huron, and the company was able to ship its homes by both boat and rail throughout the country. They did not have the volume of its competitors, but they had a great distribution reach. Lewis homes were marketed as Lewis Built or Liberty Homes, and they were shipped to Africa, Tahiti, and even to Birmingham, England, where they were used for employee housing at an Austin Motor Works factory. The Lewis family sold out their ownership in the 1920s, but the company remained in continuous operation for more than 60 years until it ceased business in 1973. A third kit manufacturing company was located in Bay City, Michigan. That was Sterling Systems Homes. This was an outgrowth of the International Mill and Timber Company, which sold homes under this brand name of Sterling Systems. The company, like its competitors, shipped by rail, but also shipped by boat across the Great Lakes. And like many of their competitors, they offered financing with 50% down, with the remainder to be paid over 2 years at just under 2% interest. In the 1920s, the Depression forced the company into bankruptcy, but it was reorganized and continued to sell kit homes until 1971. And you can see I included on this slide, on the lower left, one of their later covers from 1962, where you can see they were selling homes typical of the early 1960s, kind of these ranch and split-level homes. In the Buffalo area, there was a local supplier of ready-cut homes named the Ray H. Bennett Lumber Company of North Towanda, New York. The company boasted about their designs as being more attractive than their competitors and more impressive than average homes. Their catalog offered more than 50 designs of houses and emphasized the economy of construction through the standardization of materials. They had a huge modern mill with lumber docks on one side and then a main trunk railroad depot across the street, and they were marketed as Bennett Homes. So these are the major manufacturers. There were many other smaller manufacturers of kit homes in the country, much more regional, like the Ray Bennett Lumber Company. But despite whichever manufacturer you went with, they all offered a number of styles of different types of homes. So generally, when people think of kit homes, they think of kind of the craftsman bungalow type of house. The craftsman bungalow is typified by having this really big, full-width porch across the front, usually encompassed by the large, either hipped or gable roof, and having those very narrow, low dormers on the second floor. And so I've included here two types of bungalows from the Sterling Systems Home Catalog. This is from their 1916 catalog. However, as I mentioned, there are a number of styles of houses and even scales of houses that were available as a kit house, including the Queen Anne style. The Queen Anne style was a little bit earlier. This is kind of a late 1800s style of architecture, and it was very popular. It featured bay windows. I kind of call it kitchen sink architecture. You could have anything. Bay windows, porches, a variety of window types, many different types of wood trim, different types of siding, even on the same type of house, as you can see in the house on the right-hand side of the slide. That I believe that is clapboards on the first floor and shingles on the upper levels. So these are two Queen Anne styles. One is from a Sears Roebuck catalog, and you can see it has some bay windows, circular windows. And then on the right-hand side is a Bennett Homes. And that's actually a two-family, which is an unusual thing to find in a catalog house. In New England, this is a popular type that you can sometimes see. The shingle style was particularly popular in New England cottage architecture. It has the gambrel roof, which is that it's the kind of the barn-shaped roof with two different slopes. And this is an example from 1916 that Sears and Roebuck was selling. Probably the second most popular style of kit and catalog houses after the bungalows were these colonial revival homes. Colonial revival as a style was popular between 1880 and 1955. And it's probably the most dominant domestic building style in the first half of the 20th century. Its principal details are having a prominent central entrance, usually with some sort of portico, small porch, or pediment and gable over the entrance, which is usually in the middle. The dwellings are very symmetrical, except there's often, particularly in the two-story styles, a one-story porch or small addition sunroom that was off one side or the other of the house, which you can see in the 1922 Hawthorne example from Lewis Manufacturing Company on the left-hand side. On the far left side of the house, you can see it has a little one-story addition. One subcategory of colonial architecture is Dutch colonial revival. It's very similar to colonial revival in that it usually has a prominent front entrance. Sometimes you have that side addition that has a sunroom or a porch, as you see in the bottom image. And the only real difference is in the roof shape. So as you can see in the upper image, again, it has that gambrel roof. That's what makes the Dutch and the Dutch colonial revival. And the Marlborough doesn't really have a gambrel roof. It has what we call a clipped hip roof, that it was sloped on all four directions, but the ends of the slopes have been clipped so that the eave is at a different height, so that it exposes more of the sidewall of the house. Another style that you can find in kit houses is the Tudor revival style. The Tudor revival style was popular from 1890 to about 1940. It was characterized by steeply pitched roofs, usually with a prominent front-facing gable, massive and often ornate chimney, and decorative half-timbering, which you can see in both of these examples. And it often had a round or Tudor arch entry. And you can see in the example on the right-hand side, it has a slightly arched entryway there. These examples are from Sterling Systems homes in Sears and Roebuck. And you can see, one is quite early 1916 and the other early to mid 1930s. Also growing out of kind of the English movement was the English cottage style. We see these a lot, and I will be talking a little bit later about one of the cottages here in Cumberland, which features some of these details. Like most of the Tudor homes, an English cottage was usually featured a prominent front gable with a steep roof, and sometimes that roof would be kind of swooping. If you remember the picture that was at the front of this presentation, that's kind of the swooping Tudor roof there. Tudor roofs are very steeply pitched, which you can see in the example from Montgomery Ward on the left. And then in this case, on the Lewis Manufacturing Company, there's a pair of steeply pitched roofs. Sometimes the English cottage examples would ship with shingles that would be made to look like false thatching. So if you've ever been to Ireland or England, you can see what a thatched roof is like made with straw. And there's actually a really good example of this false asphalt shingle thatch in Portland. If you ever go to Deering Oaks and you head across the bridge that goes over 295 towards the USM, the first house on the right has a house and a garage that both feature asphalt thatched shingles. It's very odd looking. Another type of architecture that you could get through a kit home, and these tend to be more prominent in the western half of the country, although there are some examples in Maine, is either the Mission or the Spanish Revival style. These grew out of either Spanish architecture or Spanish colonial architecture in Mexico and South America, as well as even some of the Caribbean islands. They're characterized by having what they call mission-shaped dormers, which you can see in the Alhambra on the right-hand side of the screen. The little dormer at the top, directly above the entrance, is what they call a mission-shaped dormer. It's actually really also features like a parapet, which is terrible for this area because you get snow that would collect there. But, you know, in California, they don't have that, I guess. Also, large square piers on the porches and very smooth stucco walls. Again, something you don't see a lot in New England. Homes were usually symmetrical and had a very wide overhanging eave. So as I mentioned, the Alhambra is an example of that. And on the other side of the screen is an example of Spanish Revival style kit homes, which are characterized by an arched entrance, almost no overhanging eave, and then an asymmetrical front facade. These are another very popular style of home from the early 20th century, sometimes call these the four-square or the prairie style architecture. This was popular from between 1900 to about 1920. It's one of the most common vernacular forms of the prairie style of architecture that developed in the Chicago area by a group of architects that became known as the Prairie School, whose most well-known practitioner was Frank Lloyd Wright. The four-square has roughly a square plan with 4 rooms, which you can see or 4 bays that could be 4 rooms in each of the floor plans that I've shown here today. And it usually has 4 primary openings on the front facade. So if you look, for example, at the Fullerton example on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that it has 2 pairs of windows on the second floor. Each one of those is almost like forms a square. You could imagine taking a line and cutting that house into half, and then it has a group of windows on the left and the entryway door on the right. So you can almost divide that facade into 4 little squares. The arts and crafts style, also called craftsman, was popular between 1905 and 1930. It's characterized by a natural stone base, porch piers, and a chimney and multiple roof planes, either from a gable or shed roof dormers, and unenclosed overhanging eaves. So you can usually see exposed rafter tails in arts and crafts or craftsman style homes. This style was inspired by the architectural designs of the Green brothers in California and was the dominant style for small homes in the first quarter of the 20th century. These 3 examples on the screen express the variety of scale and forms to which kit house manufacturers applied the arts and crafts style. So you have a very small home from Lewis Manufacturing and a fairly large home from the 1923 Sears Roebuck catalog. And then for those companies that lasted past World War II, we have modern types of architecture. So you have these very, 1960s era. There's certainly plenty of them in here of homes built in this style in Cumberland. Both of these are from the Lewis Manufacturing companies. These are from their Liberty homes. And you can see they're just very traditional ranch-style homes. They have very small windows in the bedroom, and then the very large, big picture window, which represented the living room. And sometimes some of these would have an attached garage as well. Here's a few more examples. These are from Sterling Systems homes. And as I mentioned earlier on, these kit manufacturers were making more than houses. They were also making a garage to match your home, and you could also get an outhouse. I would think you could just build one of those, but hey. You could also, for those who were farming, you could order different farm buildings that you might need through the barn manufacturing kit catalogs. So the left-hand side of the screen is, these are from Montgomery Ward. This was the hog and poultry houses, some examples of those that you could buy. And on the right-hand side was a cow barn, because good cattle should have good housing. I love that. And here's a few more barns that you can see. Gordon Van Tyne, they had their Book of Barns from 1927. And as well, you didn't have to necessarily have a four-season house. You could have a summer cottage, both some that had a bit more conveniences and some that you probably would have had the outhouse out back. And as I mentioned, some of the early history, I talked about during the Civil War that some of those early manufacturers were providing building types for the military. Well, Aladdin also did that, and they were one of the longest running homes, so they survived through the Second World War, and they provided barracks for the U.S. military as well as for other countries. And they also did recreation-type buildings for summer camps and for company summer camps, which are the two images on the bottom of the slide. So the next part of the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit about identifying catalog homes. They can be really challenging because, as I mentioned, talking about the different manufacturers, some of the manufacturers were manufacturing the same home for themselves as well as for another company. So it can get very challenging. One of the great things is if you can get into a house that you believe to be a catalog house, some of them have the stamps or sometimes you'll find the stickers from when they were shipped. Because they were assembled as a kit, they were just like when you go to assemble a piece of furniture or a bicycle, you get, part A, part B. And so there was a numbering system, and that numbering system was usually stamped on each piece of lumber. So you can see a couple of examples of how the different manufacturers identified and stamped their timber. So if you can get into a basement that hasn't been finished off or into an attic space, sometimes you can find some of these in homes. As I mentioned earlier, another way that you can identify a catalog home is through mortgages. So many of these companies were self-mortgaging to their clients, and there's been a lot of research that's been done in recent years on who the men were that were signing these mortgages for the various companies. And so you can do deed searches for those gentlemen. And this is a case of how we found this particular house is in Brunswick. It was the Leon and Ada Pollard house. And you can see I highlighted in the top that they took out a mortgage that was signed by F.C. Schwab of this 4640 Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia. And he was one of the Sears catalog reps who signed mortgages for Sears and Roebuck Company. Sometimes it's really hard to identify if a house, particularly from the exterior, is a kit or catalog house because a number of the manufacturers stole, might be a polite, the less polite word, to use building plans and styles from some of the building plan catalogs that were circulating during this period too. So while this has that kind of very Tudor, I mentioned the very steeply pitched front entry on this house, the red house, and it could be a kit house because there are a number of kit houses that look something like this. We actually believe that this is a catalog house, that this was a house that was purchased, just the plans were purchased, not a kit of parts to assemble. And this is found on Ludlow Street in Portland near Daring High School. Standard Home Building Plan Book was a very, very popular book. It had, I think the one I was looking at the other day was 375 pages, so it had a number of plan types that they offered each year. In addition, as I talked a little bit about, some of these companies were stealing plans from each other. Some of them were creating and building the plans or building the kit of parts for other manufacturers. So a lot of the houses look very, very similar. So this is an example of a house style that is nearly indistinguishable from each other. And this is one from Lewis Manufacturing in 1935 in the upper left. From around that same period, in the middle is the Aladdin from 1931, there's Stratford, and then the Sears Manfield just from a year later, it was offered in the 1932 and 33 catalog. You can see they all feature that very steeply pitched front entrance with that swooping roof. They have a front chimney, they have a clipped hip roof, very similar window arrangement. It's very difficult to tell these apart from the street. Their plans are slightly different, so if you are able to get into a house that hasn't been altered, you can sometimes figure it out more easily from the plans. So these are the plans of those three houses, and if you look primarily, the difference is in the location of the bathroom and the stairs in the back bedroom area. They almost all have the similar layout of the dining room and the living room in the front. And as I mentioned, these catalog companies really got into the kit business because they were creating all these elements of a house that they wanted to sell. And what easier way to get you to buy their stuff for your home than to just sell you the whole thing at one time. And so in addition to, Montgomery Ward and Sears, who I think we all are familiar with those catalog companies, Bennett also had kitchen cabinetry and lights and sinks and toilets and bathtubs and faucets that they would sell you. I think one of the things that I find really charming about some of the kitchens from this era are the kitchen features that came out of the catalog, particularly the little dinettes, which I think have seen a resurgence in popularity in the last decade or two in our time now. These are a little bit narrower and smaller than I think what you see now in, if you're looking at HGTV or Better Homes and Gardens or something like that. But there are some of these still existing in homes, including this one in Portland, which is near USM, this particular example. These are taken from a recent sale, so I hope the new owners haven't ripped these out. But you can see in both examples, the one on the right has just a partial little dinette, there's just one bench, and then the example on the left, they have a double bench and a little nook off the kitchen for dining. And the built-in cabinetry and the scallop cornice over the window. This reminds me of my grandmother's house. So these are the neighborhoods that we were surveying. So you can see where I've labeled the University of Southern Maine campus just off 295, which is the very dark red lines with the clover leaf at the bottom of the image. And this neighborhood that we surveyed is in the purple. It's the Oakwood neighborhood. It was built between 1922 to 1925. Most of the houses in that neighborhood were all built at the same time. And they were built by the same developer that built the neighborhood just to the southwest of the University of Southern Maine campus, which is in kind of a dark gray blue, right off the highway. And that's where that example of the faux thatched roof, that house is in that neighborhood that he developed just before he developed the Oakwood neighborhood. So the next few examples are from the Oakwood neighborhood near USM. So we have the Martin House on Woodmont Street, which we believe is a Standard Homes, their Haverhill model, and you can see it has a little bit different of a projecting entrance, but it has that eyebrow dormer on the side of the gable roof. It features a little dinette, little booth area, which if you look on the plan on the lower right, the dining room is the room furthest down towards the bottom of the screen, the kitchen at the top on the left-hand side of the plan, and in between is that little dinette area with a little pantry across from it. In that same neighborhood is this more almost a little bit of a mission style and a little bit English style influenced kit home. This is the Robinson House from 1924, and we know that it's around 1924 because the city of Portland in 1924 took a picture of every taxable building in the city at the time. And those records are available online. The Maine Historical Society has all of those, the city of Portland's pictures. And this whole neighborhood was under construction at that time. And so some of the houses had been sold. Some of the houses were in a state of construction, and including this one, which didn't even have, it looked like the yard work had been done. It still looked like it was still under construction. This one has been worked over a bit. It isn't exactly as it was when it was built, but because we had the 1924 photo, we could use that to determine that it was a Cessford style of house. And it used to have, as you can see in the 1924 photo in the middle there, it used to have a front chimney. However, it was removed so that they could put a dormer window. That's the existing house in the upper left. One of the things that's really sweet, and I'll just step away from, oh, I'm attached, I shouldn't do that, is right here, you can see it in plan. There's a hole in the garden wall, which has a little arched opening, and it's visible just here on the side of the screen. And this is that little arched opening in the garden wall on the side of the house that still exists. This one is in the same neighborhood. This is the Mahoney House, circa 1928. I believe that this is a Sears Glen Falls house. Again, it's been altered. The porch on the left-hand side of that gable entrance has been enclosed, but everything else seems to line up, including the little tiny window in the gable end and the floor plan. Also in that same neighborhood, built around the same time, that 1924, the 1924 city photo is in the bottom left, so we can see what it looked like originally. It has, again, had a little bit of alteration. The application of vinyl siding often takes some details away from a house, and this particular house lost its pediment details over the front entrance with the application of the vinyl siding, but we can see that it existed there originally in 1924, and is a good match for the Gordon Van Tyne Hudson. So while the developer of this neighborhood was using kit and catalog homes, he wasn't in any allegiance to any one particular manufacturer. He was using anybody's kit and catalog homes that he seemed to like. But as I mentioned, it can sometimes be difficult to tell. And so while it could be Gordon Van Tyne's Hudson, because Gordon Van Tyne was making kit houses for other companies, it could also be the Cheney, I guess that's how you would say it, or the Cheney house. It's very, very similar, including the little square window which leads into the side porch, which you can see it's got the circle with the smaller, and that still exists on the house today. It's kind of hidden by one of those tall cedars. Another house that we found by mortgage and deed research was the McCrum House from 1924 in Falmouth. This is just over the bridge from Portland. It's a Sears house. It has had a few changes, but it's a Langston version kit house from Sears. Bradley Street, which is out Brighton Avenue in Portland. This was another one we identified using a mortgage. This is another Sears mortgage house, and it's the Maplewood, only it's an inverted example of the Maplewood. I think I actually inverted this picture so that it looks correct. And very similar to that is the Rand House at 272 Main Street here in Cumberland. It has that very steeply pitched entryway, and you can see that it has what I presume to be the living room on the left-hand side and probably a bedroom or a dining room on the right. And just to the other side of the entry, you have the tiny little narrow window as well as a chimney on the side of the house, which in some of the many examples of having that a kind of Tudor steeply pitched front entrance, you'll have a front chimney, but this one has a side chimney. So in looking through and trying to figure out what it could be, I looked at some different examples, and as you can see, eliminating everything that would have a front chimney, but looking specifically for a side chimney, here are 3 options that it could possibly be. However, the one on the right doesn't have a small window next to the door, and the 2 on the left, although they have the small window next to the door, they have an arched opening, and this one just has a flat entry. But I think it may be a Sterling home Pontiac. The Pontiac has the 2 windows to the left, which were into the living room, 1 window on the right into what would have been a dining room, and then it had a flat door header, as well as the small side window. And in this example, it doesn't have a chimney to the left. It has a chimney in the rear, which would have been for the flue for the heating. But Sterling Homes, like many of its competitors, would customize, and none of them sold the masonry for the chimneys. You had to buy those locally. So it could have been something that the Rand family added to their house. And this is another Sears kit home that we identified through mortgage research. This is the Pollard House in Brunswick from 1933. It's quite close to Bowdoin College. This particular floor plan of this house is a bit of a challenge because they sold this house type in different lengths according to how many bedrooms you would need. So they had an A, a B, and a D type. There were no C plans. I don't know what happened to C. They never sold a C plan for this particular house. And probably one of the grander kit homes in Maine is this house on Main Street in Saco from 1914. It's the Fenderson House. It has been altered by the application of vinyl siding, but you can still see the really grand 2-story front porch. And on the interior of the house is quite different because apparently this gentleman was a former mayor in the city of Saco, and he was outraged at the price that Sears was going to charge him for millwork. And he knew he could get his millwork from local people for cheaper. So the inside of the house doesn't match the outside of the house because he didn't buy any of the interiors from Sears, just the outside. And then these are some suspected, although not proven, Sears kit homes in Bridgeton. You can see the one on the left has been altered by the enclosure of the front porch, but there's a historic photo of that building at the top of the screen with that really wide front porch. And then just a couple houses down is another house that we suspect may be a kit house. I tossed in some more examples of kind of early kitchens. These are really lovely when I come across these, but unfortunately, they can be one of the first things to go on the interior of a house because people like to upgrade their kitchens. But there's been a real revival in kit homes and interest in kit homes and purchasing and restoring kit homes. So even today, you can find online and in magazines how to create a kitchen that meets the modern needs of today, but inspired by how a kitchen would have looked in the 1920s or 1930s. So as we were looking at this one, I mentioned earlier that there was the scallop cornice over the windows. You can see they have picked up this on this open shelving. In the image on the left, they have the scallops and then kind of some glass-fronted, more built-in type cabinetry to make a kitchen that's period appropriate to your bungalow house or kit home. Here's a few more modern examples of how people have restored or repurposed their historic kitchens in their bungalows and kit homes. And some people have taken out or have lost their dinettes, but they can use it as a little eating nook. And some people are very fortunate to still have their dining nook and preserve it, which is a great thing to see. So as you can see, and actually somebody was talking about that with me earlier, these homes are although they're now 100, some of them 100 years old, they can be still very popular and great for people who have small families. And, I think that there's a real preservation movement for these houses, although, they're not particularly that old. 100 years is not particularly old, particularly when you're thinking about homes in communities like Cumberland, where you can have a 250-year-old house. They certainly are homes that are worth preserving and worth documenting where we can. So I want to thank you very much for your attention this evening. And I can take questions now, or I'm happy to stay around if you prefer to come up and take questions, individually, so that you're not on camera if you don't want to do that. So, yes, sir.
Well, with a huge demand these days for affordable housing, do you see a comeback for these kinds of homes?
There are people who have tried. There are certainly manufacturers of what I would call more panelized homes rather than, the individual pieces that then get assembled. But some of these manufacturers were making those panelized structures. I believe there's a company in North Carolina that's doing that, but they're fairly small scale. They don't have the vast network that these coming out of their lumber history, some of these manufacturers had, and they certainly don't have the distribution that somebody like a Sears would have had, to have a catalog in nearly everyone's home, right? So I think there's a possibility for it. It certainly makes sense. I think it's happening in smaller ways, but I think the potential is there, certainly, because they are generally smaller square footages. They don't require as much space on a lot. I'm one of those people that I'd rather have like a modular home that's built in a factory that I know hasn't had rain, hasn't been rained on as it was being built, because mold is certainly an issue when you think about building super insulated homes so that they're better and more efficient homes. You have to tighten them up. They're not able to breathe. Mold can form more quickly. So, having a home that's built in a factory, I think there's even great potential for some factory-built housing for affordable housing as well. And of course, we had, a lot of manufactured housing companies in this state for a number of years in the middle of the 20th century.
These homes seem to have been extraordinarily well built because they're so preserved and new looking.
Yeah.
Was that characteristic of them?
Yes. Well, they were built, they were trying to build affordably, but they had good wood that they were using. So while, they were purchasing mill shops for framing in the South, like in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where there was a lot of southern yellow pine, which would have been used for the framing, they were using a lot of oak and harder woods in the materials in the house. And you can actually go through some of the catalogs, and they would have a chart at the back, and it was kind of the low, you had the low price, so you could get the pine, or you could upgrade to oaks and harder woods in your cabinetry and finished materials. So you really could customize it that way. So, there's perhaps some that have had rougher lives and haven't survived as well as others, but certainly, they were well built, and as long as the foundation that you put in, that they didn't supply you, was strong, some of these houses have lasted a long time.
How did that foundation process work?
So they would send you, in addition to your kit of parts and the instruction booklet, you would get a drawing for your contractor to put in the foundation. And then you had to certify that he had assembled your foundation to the very specification that they required, or else when they shipped you the pieces wouldn't fit on the foundation. So you had to certify that your tolerances in the foundation were met their specs.
Have you found one of those master instruction booklets?
I have seen a master instruction booklet.
But you don't have one?
I don't have it, no. It was quite thick, and it was for a house in Orono. There are a number of kit houses in Orono, just south of the college.
Has one been digitized?
No. It's in the collection of someone who let me see it. Maybe someday it'll come on the market. I don't believe I'll be in her will, but I would love to, because it was very interesting to read it. And to read, they had the contracts, like the contract for the foundation, they had saved everything. It was really interesting to read. The gentleman had been a professor at the university who had ordered the house.
In Maine?
In Maine, Orono.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
I mean, it just seems so incredible to me to think that, you get this stuff shipped to you, you know, like 100 years ago, and the realities of trying to put together this house, are there stories, or who's the typical? I can understand, you know, a company that's buying these and putting them together, but like individuals and how they're actually
Yeah.
doing it. Are they contracting out, or are they actually building it themselves?
Both. So like the gentleman from Orono that I mentioned, his was done by a contractor. He had a contractor assemble it. But there certainly are families who would assemble their own, you know, if they had some skill, they would do some of the, you know, just like people do today, they do some of their own building, you know, to their own skill level. And maybe you hire a plumber to come in, or the electrician or something like that. But yeah, it was really for both. I will say that the how-to was pretty well written. The one that I read was pretty well written and understandable. But then also I have a background in design because I was trained as an architect, so maybe that's not the best example of someone trying to put it together. But I still think, you know, I mean, I put lots of things together and end up with like extra screws and, you know, parts that don't go together, because sometimes that happens. And so you would hope that that didn't happen on some of these homes. But the other thing is that one, I didn't mention it in here or show a picture of it, but one of the ways that you can often tell a kit house, a two-story kit house, is because they couldn't, within a certain tolerance, figure out the trim that came down along the stair riser. So the gentleman is standing back there next to a stair riser. So there's a piece of trim that comes along the wall that follows your stair treads and risers. And where that would land on your floor, they couldn't always figure that out. So they created a block system that was just a piece of wood that could then be shaved down. They would send it at a wider length, and you could shave it down to fit where your stair would meet your floor. So they included some little things like that. So if the house wasn't coming together exactly right, there were different places in the house where you could cheat a little. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a standard a catalog of standard plans. Was that the brand Standard House
Standard
Plans?
homes, yeah.
And are they around? Are those catalogs around in libraries?
They are digitized, so I believe there's one in the Library of Congress that's available digitally, a couple of other colleges. So if you just Google that, there's also a website, I think it's Antique Homes, it might be .com or something like that. They have scanned and digitized a number of catalogs from the different manufacturers from different years. They don't have all of them, but they have quite a few of them. And I think they may have a link on their website to a standard catalog. But they're really amazing to sit down and go through, because there was a lot of plans.
Well, I mean, and with the similarity between the ones that were being sold as kits and then the ones that were being, we just bought the plans, right? It covers a lot of the homes that we see everywhere.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of homes in Maine that were built probably using standard plans, because you would get a builder, just like, a lot of the homes that were built in the mid-19th century, you'd be astonished at how many people were building homes in the Portland area using Asher Benjamin's catalogs. He was a very popular plan and catalog producer. And so builders have always used that, in the very early 18th, the late 1700s and the early 1800s, a lot of the plans were coming from Britain. There were plan books that were being made and shipped over here. So a lot of early homes, grand homes in the colony, were actually built using plans from overseas. And so it's a long tradition, but the kit part is the unusual piece, to get everything shipped to you by train. And really, if we hadn't had the railroads and that infrastructure, it probably wouldn't have happened like it did. Anything else? Oh my goodness. It's wrapped. Oh, well, thank you very much for having me again. It's so lovely to be here.
It's good.
Thank you.